Welcome to the Grace and Grit podcast, made for women who want their healthiest years to be ahead of them, not behind them. Join your host, Courtney Townley, right now as she breaks down the fairy tale health story you have been chasing all of your life into sensible action steps and lasting change. Welcome to the Grace and Grit podcast. This is your host, Courtney Townley. And as always, thank you so much for taking time out of a busy schedule to be here with me. I deeply appreciate your listenership. And we are going strong on the theme for the month of June, which is modern day mental health. It's clearly landing. I have gotten so many emails and private messages from you telling me that you're reaping value from it, which makes my heart so happy because that's really the point. Is we're trying to help you navigate life with more ease and grace. Now, in case you're just catching this theme for the first time, I just want to let you know that episode number 1 aired 2 weeks ago. And in that episode, we talked about lifestyle factors that influence the state of our mental health. So it's not just mental stress, but things like lack of sleep or poor nutrition or lack of hydration. There's so many things that can directly influence the state of our mental well-being. And so we touched on a lot of those things in that first episode to kind of lay the course for what was to come. Now, in episode 2, which aired last weekend, we talked about 3 simple steps that you could engage with daily to more easily manage your mental landscape. And they were just very simple tools. But let me just say here and now, again, that simple is not always easy, right? That we can sort of conceptualize that something is simple in nature, but then it's a little bit difficult for us to sometimes show up and actually do it. But I did provide a lot of simple steps for you in that episode. Now, today, I could not be more excited and honored to have Dr. Sarkis on the show. Many of you know that a couple weeks ago, I went to LA for a Latin dance festival. And of course, since I was in LA, I met up with my good friend, Jackie McDougall, who is the host of the 40 Thrive podcast. If you've never listened to the 40 Thrive podcast, get your butt over there and check it out. It's really good stuff. But over lunch, I was telling Jackie how excited I was to host this modern day mental health theme. And without hesitation, she immediately suggested that I reach out to Dr. Sarkis. And Jackie has never led me astray when it comes to guests. So I took her advice and I invited Sarah to the show. So Dr. Sarkis is a psychologist, a writer, and performance consultant with a private practice in Honolulu, Hawaii. And she's a Boston girl at heart. So you know how I love Boston people, right? Her integrated approach is really big on science and really low on bullshit, empowering her clients to achieve long-term change and growth through an eclectic blend of psychology, neurobiology, and functional medicine. I have a million questions to ask her, so let's get to it. Sarah, welcome to the show, and thank you so much for being here.
Oh, thank you for having me. I was so thrilled to hear from you. I think I said in the email, I was like, oh, I had you on my list of people to email.
Yay! I love it when life works out that way.
I know. And I just love Jackie. When I connected with her, I was like, oh my God, this is like a long lost
I know. She's
sibling.
It's so true. You cannot love that woman. She's incredible.
She is.
So let me start by saying I'm really sorry you live in Hawaii. That must be really hard.
I know. It's a source of ongoing struggle for me.
I love it. I'm very envious.
Yeah, we moved here like 10 years ago.
Fantastic. We got married in Kauai, so I have not been back since. It's time. It's been 15 years.
Yeah. Hey.
I know.
Exactly. And you should come over to Oahu.
I definitely will. I will definitely, when I make that trip, I will come over there and meet you in the flesh.
Yes, exactly.
Now, I just gave a short intro of you, obviously, but I would love for listeners to hear a bit more about you and the work that you do in the world directly from you. And I also would like you to tell people why you chose this line of work.
Oh, that's such a good question. Okay. So I'll sort of take it backwards. I'll start with why I chose this line of work. And actually, it's something now, I'm in my mid-40s. It's something now that I think about so much more deeply because I made this decision senior year of college. So I was like, the ripe old age of 22.
When you know everything, of course.
When you literally think you know everything, right? I mean, the righteousness of the 20s is like all that gets us out of our nest, our family of origin, right?
Yes.
So in college, I was studying English and I was studying psychology. And I had sort of a number of professors who were really supportive and really seemed to take an interest in helping me kind of figure out a chapter after college, right?
Mm-hmm.
And, now in retrospect, I see that I kind of had these two loves. I had writing and I had psychology, and I had neither the cognitive development nor the psychological fortitude at the time to know that I could marry those two things eventually. As the 20s often has, it has sort of like black or white thinking, right?
It's so true.
You know everything. Yes, exactly. Yeah. So I too suffered from the same developmental limitation. And so I picked psychology. At the time, first of all, I was super interested in it. Second of all, my family of origin was going through a huge shift. I'm the youngest of 6. My parents were separating. It was really contentious. And my primary drive was, I need to find a career that I'll feel passionate about and I can support myself for the rest of my life. And so those things sort of steered me toward the more concrete the more concrete pursuit of psychology. And I really spent kind of the next 10 years, I got my master's and then my doctorate, and then all the stuff that comes after that. You got to do an internship and a postdoc and all this other stuff, take a licensing exam. So it's a long road. It was about 9 years total. But, it was exactly what I needed at that age to anchor me. And now I'm both like horrified that I made that decision at 22, but I also feel it sort of panned out quite nicely. And I have a great career. So to sort of segue into the second part of it, which is what is my professional life look like right now?
Yes.
So I live in Hawaii. Previously, I lived in Boston, and I have my sort of primary gig is that I have a private practice where I work with adults, so 18 and older. My target age, I would say, is 25 to 70.
Okay.
And I see people very regularly in sort of long-term insight-oriented therapy. And my kind of therapy kind of straddles this. It's like a hybrid between like kind of classic insight-oriented therapy, coaching, consulting, and, like personal empowerment stuff. And so it has this nice blend. Over the years, I've collected lots of different sort of theories and strategies that have helped me both figure out my own vessel and help other people optimize theirs. And so that's why I say mine is kind of a blend of like psychology, neurobiology, and functional medicine. And that sort of right now in this chapter seems like, it's a good blend of 3 distinct practices that help my patients, feel less, whatever it is that they're coming in to feel. And that's really an N of 1.
I love that because I hear in that you kind of have a modern day approach to therapy. You're coming at it from a lot of different angles. And I heard you say in your interview with Jackie that you consider yourself a generalist, which I love because I feel the same, like with movement practices, when people become specialists in one movement modality, it's not that there isn't a lot of benefit to that. There is, but we also lose a lot of skill in other areas. with our movement. And so I love that you kind of see that there were gaps in each one of those specialties, and you kind of created a blend to suit the needs of your clients.
Yeah, it's true. And I also think like you really get to see in yourself and just in life, you really get to see like how somebody's kind of cognitive style is, how their brain likes to take information. And I'm kind of a generalist in life, right? Like I tend to be somebody that sees a big picture, likes to tie together lots of different concepts. And it's funny because I'm always like both super impressed, a little bit envious, and couldn't imagine being a specialist. But I see people that do it with
beautifully.
Oh my gosh. I mean, you can just tell that their brain is doing exactly what their brain style was geared to do. And I really feel like mine, especially in my 40s, is really hit its groove. It's found what works for me, and being a jack of a lot of different trades, but really not a master in any of them, suits my personality style really well.
That's great. What a great place to be.
Yeah, I know. I'm psyched. It's better than where I was.
Yeah. Now, when we say the word or the phrase mental health, I know for me personally that I used to hear that phrase, probably 15, 20 years ago when I was much younger, because I too am in my mid-40s. And I would think of serious conditions, right, that required serious medical intervention. But having worked with women for the past 2 decades on improving physical health, I really now realize that mental health is something that every person would benefit from investing in, because every human faces life challenges. So my question to you is, how do you define mental health right now at this age and stage of your life and this age and stage of your profession?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I agree. When I was sort of coming up in training, going back to that discussion about sort of subspecialties, kind of like everybody had like a thing that they were studying, right?
Yes.
And again, because my brain just works this way, I could never stop seeing the whole puzzle. So the way that I really have come over the years, decades, to see mental health is that I would say there's a couple of qualities that are present in people who are, and I'm even reluctant to kind of use the word like thriving, because just as a baseline to any listener, we've got to just get comfortable with struggle.
Oh, yeah.
We just have to start to depathologize it and put it back in all the difficult feelings, anxiety, sadness, grief, pain. They have to come back in to the pantheon of other feelings that are glorified: love, lust,
happiness,
contentment, bliss, right? All our feelings and our experiences, they are morally and ethically neutral. They are just feelings that are happening inside of you. And so for me, I started noticing it. By the way, most of what I've ever noticed is completely self-serving. It's because I have had to figure out some psychological riddle inside myself in order to make it through a certain chapter. And this one is no different. But I've noticed that mental health has these qualities. And if I had to sort of summarize them into 2 things, it would be high tolerance for ambiguity, high psychological flexibility. And these 2 capacities, which by the way sound super like, oh, great, I'll put that on my list of things to focus on. But they unravel and reveal to us and reflect to us the nuances of our psychology and our neurobiology so profoundly that it's usually a horror show. At least it was for me, and it continues to be at some level when I'm
glad
struggling.
to know you're human. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But really for mental health, like the thing I always try to get people, instead of focusing on, I want to feel better, I don't want to feel this way, I don't want to have anxiety. I don't want to feel this sadness. I try to get people to really start to look at, okay, what is your relationship to that feeling? What comes up for you? What are your assumptions? Assumptions are usually hidden unconscious motives and patterns. Mm-hmm. What are your assumptions about it? And what are you using to avoid that feeling, right? So gamut of things: sex, drugs, infidelity, over-exercising, under-exercising, overeating, under-eating. I mean, we could go on and on and on and get sort of even more fringy, right? Like pain.
Yeah.
Pain is often a way that our body distracts us from other feelings. And it has a psychological origin, usually, even if the actual physical pain is present and real. So that's sort of my general philosophy for people.
Will you speak a little bit more to that first point about comfort? I think you said comfort and ambiguity.
Yeah.
Yeah, because that's a really powerful phrase. And I would love for you to go a little deeper with that so we all understand.
Yeah. So what my experience has been is that oftentimes, when we look at the national, just take America, United States, right? And we look at the statistics on the two leading reasons that people land in my office, and I would venture to say most of the offices of any clinician that's listening. It's anxiety and depression. Mm. When we look at those statistics, we are really led to believe that there is either some sort of crazy uptick in genetic mutations that are resulting in these, quote, mental illnesses.
Yes.
Which on a completely separate podcast, we probably have to tackle that topic.
Yes, I'll invite you back for sure.
Exactly. Or we're left to believe that we're essentially a species that's headed toward self-destruction because our psychology is deteriorating so much. Mm-hmm. And I sort of got fascinated by that. And I was like, wait, how is this happening when we have more and more access to treatment modalities that can help people? And what I started observing just in my populations and everybody that walks through my office, you're an N of one. So we get to experience you unique to yourself. Mm. And what I started noticing was that a lot of people's suffering was actually a result of how they experienced their own humanness. Yeah. Right? They had judgments about how they should be feeling, or that what they were feeling is pathologic. And so for me, there became this desire to depathologize a lot of our feelings. Now, I sit in the trenches of the human condition. So there are certainly cases where it behooves us to be really honest that something really serious is going on.
Of course.
There are those cases. But my experience has been the vast majority of people, it's not all that effed up. It's regular human suffering. And that once we learn how to increase our tolerance for uncertainty and ambiguity, and we increase our psychological flexibility and do, a couple of other things that pull in other domains of our life, like you mentioned at the beginning of the hour in the intro, which is just like, genius. I hope more and more people continue to talk about this. Sleep, hydration, nutrition, movement, and recovery. These are 5 areas that every listener can start tonight, and they can, within certainly 30 days, they can start to experience profound, first of all, the first and most important thing before relief is that they can engage in a practice that allows them to better know themselves, to better learn who they are and how they operate in the world, what holds them back, what are the factors that sabotage their growth. So just by turning your focus to these 5 areas, it forces you into a relationship with contemplation and self-observation. And then secondly, as a byproduct, you get stretches of time. That's my concession to this topic. You get stretches of time where you feel really well.
Yes.
And wellness is not just the absence of feeling shitty. It's the presence.
Good clarification. Yeah.
It's the presence of feeling good.
Yes.
So as I started to notice that, it naturally sent me in an integrative, or what I'm calling a functional medicine approach to wellness. And I have to tell you, like in 20 years of being in practice with lots of different humans that have come through my door, taking this approach, which, it's like you said, it's not complicated, but it's not easy.
Mm-hmm.
Taking this approach, most people are not pathologically unwell.
Yeah.
They're in a process of life that different chapters have difficulties, and they also had a relationship to their expectations of what life would feel like that added an additional layer of suffering.
Yeah, let's talk about that, because that's big. I mean, all of this is big, but I feel like a lot of people are walking around sort of doing that. They're kind of punching themselves in the face. They're feeling bad about feeling bad. And so they reach for the things that you mentioned before, the food, the alcohol, kind of all those false pleasures that are creating a much bigger problem than standing in the arena with the emotion they were originally trying to escape from.
Yeah, 100%.
And I love how you phrased that. You said just a little bit ago that all emotion in the human spectrum of emotion is morally and ethically neutral.
Yeah.
That's so good. Like I love that perspective. And I would love for you maybe just to, we do live in a culture that promotes that we should always be feeling happy. And good Lord, in the age of social media.
Oh, it's too much.
Oh, it's everyone's highlight reel, which only makes it worse. It compounds everything. And it really, I know with my client base, it's caused so many women to feel inadequate and they feel shame, especially when they're feeling a lot of other emotions in their human experience other than the happy, I always call it the rainbows and butterflies.
Yeah.
Right? When we're feeling difficult things like frustration or sadness or loneliness. And it's so normal. And so how do you start to enter the arena of learning how to feel all the feels and not just cherry pick the happy ones and try to escape from the ones you don't want to feel, which is really creating a lot of other problems in your life? Like, are there any tips you can throw out to listeners? Because I feel like it's just such a relevant problem for everyone.
Yeah, it's a hugely relevant problem. And you have no idea how much I love that you touched on the hashtag gratitude and positive thinking movement, of which I want to be clear. It's not just that I'm dark and stormy. I
don't see that about you at all.
I think that authentic, spontaneous positivity and gratitude are just like love and fear and all the other feelings that we feel. They are awesome. And when they surface, I encourage anybody to really snuggle in and absorb it, because those great moments where you're realizing that, despite the fact that you too suffer from being a mere mortal, and that means you are imperfect, impermanent, and going to suffer on planet Earth. Just because you are a mere mortal doesn't mean you can't have these moments of amazingness. It's all true. But when we force that, or we use that as a way, just as if you're using exercise to avoid feelings, you are artificially inducing feelings that don't actually exist for you. And, there's times and places for that kind of very strategic and targeted work. But I think I almost said better. And I'm taking that back because I want it to be, again, morally neutral. I think that the approach that will have more return on your investment is if we learn how to just tolerate whatever it is that we're feeling. And so to that end, and this is like literally the last thing anybody wants to hear when the question is, how do we start to learn how to tolerate our feelings more? But the highest bang you're going to get for your buck is a practice of stillness.
Yeah.
Some form of self-reflection and self-observation where you can't outrun yourself. You can't pick the phone up. You can't scroll through social media. You can't send another email. You can't do the well-worn patterns that keep us distant from ourselves. And feelings and sensations are a form of communication, and they communicate with your whole system. They send cascading of messages to your endocrine system, to your adrenals, to your brain. It's all connected. We actually aren't subspecialties. That was created in a system, the medical system, but in reality, we are one system. Yes. And so you learn how to tolerate your feelings, and it's a muscle. So all it requires is the same principles that physical endurance, which is all the well-worn path to physical endurance, has usually been time under tension.
Yes.
So if you use that same principle, then for the psychological process, you really get the same results. It's not actually complicated. It's just really hard. Like I actually at this point annoy myself every time I have to say stillness, because I know it's the last thing really anybody wants to hear. They want to believe like, no, but what do I do? I'm like, no, that is doing.
Yes. I always use the word pause, and I always say, there's that damn word again, pause. I know you don't want to hear it, but I'm telling you, it's the secret to life.
It just is. When you think about, I always try to think about and use language that will help patients neutralize what were previously sort of detrimental assumptions they had about feelings, right? So I always just say, like, if you want to get the biggest return on your investment, you've got to incorporate some process of self-reflection and stillness. I mean, stillness will put that in front of you, lickety split.
And I see that a lot of, and I work with women, so that's why I keep saying women. I don't work with men. But because I work with women, I see a lot of women using busyness almost as sort of a way to distract themselves from not being still. So they put more on their to-do list. They work harder at work so they don't have to face the things that they're trying to escape. And so my question to you is, there's a lot of resistance to be still because people are terrified about what they're going to see when they lift up the rug, right? When they sit with themselves.
100%.
So how do we gracefully and gently start to move into that space of being willing to look under the rug, turn on the light, and remove the shame and remove the judgment and remove the inner critic and just notice what we see? Because I think this is again, it's a big obstacle for many, many women. They've heard the importance of a stillness practice. They can theoretically get it, but there is literally this visceral fear of what they will have to confront if they sit alone with that stuff. Yeah.
So I guess the first thing I'd say is, in the original question, you said, like, so, what are some tools or whatever that people can use to sort of gracefully do this? I guess I'd say, first of all, you've got to loosen the grip on graceful. It might not be. Mm-hmm. You've got to loosen the preconceived notions that this should be like, namaste, and like you should be, with your prayer beads and whatnot. Yeah. Like, it might not be. I mean, there's a lot of times where that practice of stillness is like going 18 rounds with Mike Tyson. I mean, there's just, It's not all, it arguably it won't feel good, or you would have been doing it already.
Right.
So I would say that, first really look at and examine, like, okay, so what are the things getting in my way? Well, maybe one of the things is that I think that this should feel graceful, or this should feel like I'm, really making progress, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's not always going to feel that way. And at first, it's going to feel
like your 2 left feet.
Yeah, and really cumbersome. I mean, remember the principle of time under tension. So let's say somebody starts exercise for the first time in their life at 30, right?
Yes.
Your cardio regiment is going to be like 5 minutes. Like
right.
So same thing here. Like if the time under tension, if to exhaustion is 2 minutes, then great. And then next time, try to do 3. And the time after that, try to do 4. So first of all, just observe. And when you can't, observe that. What got in the way? Go back and problem solve. So, okay, what got in the way? Oh, well, this time around, what got in the way was that I really thought that this should feel good. And it didn't feel good, so I stopped doing it. It's like, oh, okay, so that's an assumption that probably permeates other areas of your life, because how you do one thing is how you do all things. And so let's now look at that and look at what you got from just trying to be still. Like now we have an inroad. Therapeutically, we have an inroad. Like, oh, that's really interesting. So are there other things in your life that you stop doing if it's uncomfortable? Okay, so let's start looking there. So really for me, since the goal is observation, I'll get them anyway. I mean, I'll get them there's no escape. If you land in my office, there's no escaping. I'll make you observe every single thing that, my radar screen catches, right? I mean, I'm mortal, so there's things I miss. But if I catch it, we're going to look at it. So that's really how stillness enhances the therapeutic process, is that it forces the person to come up against all the things that busy and any other defense mechanism they are using to stay distant from themselves.
Yes. And so this is where emotional flexibility comes in.
Yes, exactly.
So let's talk about that. I have to tell you, I do gift this book all the time, but Susan David's Emotional Agility.
Oh, yes.
One of my
her
favorite.
book. Love her book. And I also think for anybody listening who has not read that,
yes,
we should tag her when we promote
yes.
this, because that book is a prime example of somebody who has sat in the trenches for decades.
Yeah.
And she is really strategy based. And so, anybody who is finding that this discussion about emotional flexibility, agility, dexterity, call it whatever you want, right?
Yes.
If this is talking to you, that's a great practical book. And she's from Harvard, so it's all empirically based.
Yeah, I always say to everybody that it should be required reading for all humans.
It definitely, if you are in the enterprise, if you are trying to do, any journey of how can I optimize my human experience.
Yes. Agreed. Wholeheartedly. Oh, I'm so glad you like it. So let's talk about emotional flexibility and what that is and why it's so beneficial.
Yeah. So it's super important because prior to developing this muscle, it's a developmental muscle development, I should say, ahead of time. When I was at Georgetown and when I was in my master's and my doctoral programs, we studied child development. And that's the foundation of what I learned. And I didn't actually, I guess I took lifespan development, but after adolescence, they sort of just kind of gloss over it. It's and then you're basically formed and good luck.
Yeah.
And I really underestimated for many years, just out of naivete, adult development. And it turns out that, the old adage, old dogs can't learn new tricks, is a complete misnomer. Old dogs are uniquely primed to learn new tricks. And the spectrum of development literally happens until you take your last breath.
Yes.
And so this capacity for psychological, in fact, this whole notion of like, oh, so-and-so is an old soul, or like, oh, she has so much wisdom. That's all just talking about this ability to be psychologically flexible. That's usually what it all winds down to, is people who seem to have this sort of wisdom or this knowledge about life that eludes most of us. And so that's really what I turned my attention to when it came to therapeutic goals. It really wasn't anymore like, oh, I want you to have less episodes of anxiety. By the way, that's just a byproduct. You will have less episodes of anxiety when you are not clinging to control, fear, and uncertainty as your guidepost.
Yeah.
And so the whole kit and caboodle is learning how to be inside your own human experience without having to shapeshift it. I mean, if you think about a lot of the defense mechanisms that people use, whether it's substance abuse, whether it's repression, whether it's denial, whether it's avoidance, these are all defense mechanisms.
Yeah.
And it's to defend you against feeling overwhelmed because you fear that you can't handle what you'd feel if you just allowed yourself to have your experience. And so, once I saw this, you can never unsee it. So then I really started to focus on that, not exclusively, but heavily.
Yeah.
Heavily. And the way that I focus on it therapeutically, or when I'm working with people in my consulting and coaching practice, which is a newer part of my career. So the way that I do it is I try to get people to really observe what it is that they are feeling and how it's dysregulating them. So they start to really understand the mind, body, brain connection. Like, you felt a feeling, you deployed this certain approach to try to neutralize it. By the way, it only marginally works. That's why we have to, that game of avoiding our feelings, it's always additive. You have to keep on adding in strategies because it doesn't work. So in order to maintain,
and it's exhausting.
It's exhausting. That's why you get burnt out. You get adrenal fatigue. You get all kinds of physical representations of what is happening psychologically for you. And likewise, you have psychological remnants of what has happened to you on a physical level. So if your body is flooded with cortisol all the time and you're basically in some version of fight, flight, or freeze all the time, then I don't know how you could possibly ask your psychology to be cheery and happy.
Right.
I don't know how that works out. Like, that doesn't add up to me, because we are a single vessel, right? So,
you know what I find a lot? I hear this a lot more, and especially just even today, I had this conversation twice with two different clients, that they don't feel happy and cheery, but they put on the mask that they are.
Yeah.
So nobody knows about it, which also is exhausting, right? And it makes us feel very inauthentic with ourselves.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Super inauthentic, and it makes us feel alone. It actually keeps us distant from the people in our life who want to love and support us.
And like we said at the beginning, that love and support connection is so important. That feeling of community and connection is so powerful to both of our physical and mental health.
It really is. I mean, when you look at the books on like blue zones, right? It's like a sense of community, whether it comes through like, church, school, neighborhood, family, friends, whatever the sense of community is, faith in general. When we look at longevity, the people that are living the longest have that. And so it's super critical. It can't be estimated, but I wanted to say something to you about, for people that are listening who maybe just identified with what you said about like camouflaging your experience.
Yes, that's a great way to say it.
Yeah, it's camouflage. And I can really relate to this because I'm somebody
Me too.
and I think a lot of high performing, ambitious people do feel this way, right? And that comes from your own unique experiences, usually from our childhood and then reinforced throughout our life. But, I'm definitely somebody who can sometimes, especially being a therapist, you can sometimes get into the mode where everybody else's story, but nobody knows yours, because that's the world we live in. When we interface with our clients, they are to listen to us yap about ourselves, right?
Right.
But I'll say this. So for any of the women and any of the listeners who might resonate with that, that's a real space. Right there is the intersection that I would tell you to start. Because probably on the underbelly of that is some relationship to either all or one component of what I'm about to say. Perfectionism, imposter syndrome, people pleasing, self-worth, feeling unlovable. We could go on and on where your listeners are going to be like, we get it, girlfriend. Move off the train.
Yeah, I identify with all of those. Thank you very much. Yeah,
me too. So that's the space to start, is to really observe deeply inside of yourself these dynamics, because they are operating whether or not you acknowledge them, whether they are unconscious or you are suppressing them. Suppression is always conscious, meaning it's there and you say silently, I'm not going to feel that, right? So whether it's unconscious or you are denying it, suppressing it, it's operating with considerable influence in your life.
Yeah.
And it won't go away until you wrestle with it.
Yeah. Yeah. I brought up a personal experience in my own life that I used to use anger as my defense mechanism for everything.
Me too.
If there was anything in my zone that I didn't want to feel, it was definitely greeted with anger. Anger was my way to just bowl over it. And when I started working with a therapist, I distinctly remember saying to her, so you want me to spend time I don't have feeling things I don't want to feel? And she was like, pretty much.
Bingo.
Yeah, that's exactly the work, Courtney. And I was like, oh man, it definitely was a moment of kind of realizing that is the work that needed to be done. And also just kind of having that heavy heart that it's the exact work that I'd been avoiding most of my life.
I totally agree with you. And I always try to use this language. It's an injury.
Yeah.
There might be multiple tiny injuries. It could have been one cataclysmic one. It doesn't have to be rational. You don't have to like it, but it's an injury. And it's got to be heard and looked at in order to be able to metabolize it and move through it. And these are the things that hang most of us up. It's not like, for most of us, all these things that we can see, even the thing we said earlier about the movement and the this and that, that's all true. And until we get to this deeper layer, we will basically orbit around pretty similar patterns in our life until we don't. And some of us don't ever get there, and some of us do, and some of us partially do. But I really relate to that go-to experience. And I will say this, it got me really far. I really rode those neurochemicals, right?
Yes.
I rode that as far as that train was going to take me.
Yeah.
Without really having just bad things happen in my life.
Yeah. I love how you said that. We need to metabolize it. And the only way we can metabolize it, digest it, process it is to allow it. right? To
Yes.
be with sort of all the things that we're trying to avoid. And it sounds really terrible, but the craziest thing is we're creating a lot of terror in our life by constantly avoiding it with all these false pleasures that are creating a lot of issues that we don't want to be dealing with. So I have to ask this question, like, why do we fear emotion so much? I mean, it's a vibration in the body. It's never killed us. Like, what?
Actually, that's a good point.
Why are we so afraid of it?
Well, that's a super complicated answer, of which I probably only grasp a portion of it, but I'll sort of like throw my less than 2 cents into that ring. So first of all, I think for the generations maybe prior to the last, I'm going to be generous and say 10 years, but it may even be less than that. We have to remember that like when we were growing up, right? I mean, it was the suppression model. Like you were supposed to behave certain ways. You got reinforced for that. Every family has their own nuance to that. I'm obviously speaking in generalities, which, has a few standard deviations of accuracy there. But, you're reinforced for certain behaviors, you're punished for other behaviors. So right then and there, your animal is learning exactly what it needs to learn to get through the family environment that it needed to in order to get its needs met. To
survive.
We are we are brilliant at that.
Yeah.
But we also had a medical model that starting a couple of decades ago, really snuggled into this notion of suppressing feelings, suppressing the experience. And I'm not a no medication kind of gal.
Sure.
There are cases where it's life-saving. And I want my audience to know, and I want any podcast that I'm ever on to be really clear that there's no shame in it.
Absolutely.
If it's helping you. But we, as a system, there just was many, many years where we got, certainly as therapists, we got the messages that people need to stop feeling this way. They need to stop feeling anxious in order to be well. And that's just not true. You have to learn how to change your relationship to anxiety. Obviously, if you're having panic attacks, we need to support you in the short run so that you can do the hard work of the self-regulatory processes that are internal, right? But the vast majority of cases of anxiety, say, don't land you in the emergency room.
Right.
They're on the continuum of, normal experiences. And so, I think it's very layered how we sort of came to this place, but I do think it's changing. And I think there is a real effort now among people like us that are very like-minded in this to destigmatize our feelings and to allow them to just exist and learn how to develop the emotional flexibility and the tolerance for ambiguity and sort of the grace under pressure kind of model.
Yeah. I love all of that. I mean, it resonates so much. And I can't help, this phrase keeps coming up, but like in my thinking as you're speaking, that to live life in this way, to really be willing to step in to that arena and allow all of the emotions that come with all of the challenges of life, it's a very courageous act.
Super brave.
Super brave. And isn't it fascinating that we don't look at it that way? Like if we watched somebody else go through it, we would say, oh, she's so brave. But when it comes to us, like our own personal decisions around this, there's so much judgment. And we feel like I know for me, I felt really weak. I was so ashamed and kind of just so disappointed in myself that I needed therapy in order to really live a better life. But that's really what it came down to. I was so tired of my own BS that I needed help to navigate my way out of it.
Completely.
But I didn't look at it as a courageous act. I mean, honestly, I didn't talk about it for a really long time with anybody, not even my husband. He kind of knew that I was going to therapy, but he didn't really know anything extensive.
Right. It's like a dirty secret that
Totally.
you have to hide.
Yeah.
Yeah. I really try to destigmatize, and I say to people right from the start, like, this is not a process that is focused on pathology. This is a process where you can invest in deeply knowing yourself and figuring out the best way for you to move forward without so much internal angst about it.
Yeah.
You know, and I think that I would say now, like, the vast majority of people that I work with really get that. Like, they get, I knew that I felt like at a certain point in my career, my referral sources became predominantly from other patients. And I knew then that the efforts to depathologize the human experience was working with my people because they were actually now talking about their process without any shame. They weren't like, oh, I was like so screwed up and I had to, you know, they were like, no, this is just something I've been doing and it's really helpful. Like, it's, you know, just like going to yoga, you know, it's just another practice of self-care.
Yes.
And I hope that we continue to move in that direction. I think that this is such a great time in the medical and mental health field and self-help world, because it is becoming mainstream. It's like becoming cool to be in therapy.
Yeah. Well, and I think also, like, all of your clients that referred you, it's like when you experience such a massive internal kind of transformation, you learn how to rumble in a healthy way with all that huge scope of emotion. You want to talk about it because you realize it's like a secret that nobody's let you in on for all these years. That's how I felt. Like, initially it was a kind of a form of embarrassment for me. But then the deeper I got into therapy, I was like, how is not everybody doing this? Because this is stuff to me that should be, it's kind of like, you know, I always joke that in grade school, we never learned how to do laundry and pay our bills. And those are such quality life skills that everybody should know. It's ridiculous. Totally. It's not a part of our education system. And that's exactly how I feel about therapy. Like, it is we are doing our kids such a disservice by not introducing this stuff from day one.
I mean, listen, I totally agree. And at least at this point in my career, I feel like it's not just a greedy grab at self-preservation of my profession. I feel like everybody should. And I joke that, like, you know, I don't know how you trust somebody that isn't doing some kind of process of introspection. And I don't know how anybody in this day and age, especially children who are, you know, think about how cumbersome it is for us. And we have a fully developed brain.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I just can't, I would have been a basket case if I was a child in this society, because there's so many rabbit holes to self-destruct.
Yeah. And opportunities to distract.
My gosh.
Never deal with anything.
Never deal with anything. And so I don't know how you optimize your performance in any arena, professionally, interpersonally, parenting, in your marriage. I don't know how you do that without a practice of self-reflection.
You can't. I'm with you. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, I'm always amazed. I'm always like, wow, like, that's impressive, because I can tell you that I went into therapy my senior year of college. That's when my junior year of college, when my parents were separating, at my mother's suggestion. And then, so I did that like while I was in DC. And then I went into like a 8-year therapeutic relationship with a man in Massachusetts a much older man who was amazing. And I did it 3 days a week.
Yeah.
And I was like,
but think about it. Like, people have no problem going to the gym 3 to 6 times a week, or, spending hours preparing their food, or, not that everyone wants to live that way, but there are a lot of people who feel like that's a healthy thing to do.
oh yeah.
And why we feel shameful about putting that time and attention on our mental health makes absolutely no sense.
Well, I really think it's what you were saying earlier, which is that I think people feel afraid. They feel afraid of what they'll discover. They feel afraid that if they sort of tweak the current protocol, like a game of Jenga, like God knows what will sort of come tumbling down.
Sure.
I think they fear vulnerability.
Yes.
And, I have a lot of empathy for that, because people, they don't know what they don't know.
So true. And I'll tell you what else I feared. I knew for years I needed therapy. I really did. And I avoided it, number one, because I didn't want to do the work, but also because I didn't want to have to try on a lot of shoes to see which one fit. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of how I was looking at finding a therapist. Mm-hmm. Like, I needed somebody who I was going to resonate with right away. And I didn't want to have to go from therapist to therapist to therapist to find the right person. Mm-hmm. And my strategy, and I would love to hear your 2 cents about this in terms of how you encourage people to find a good therapist.
That's a great question.
But I reached out to several friends who I trusted wholeheartedly, and I just told them that I was looking for a therapist and who might they recommend. And I got a collection of names, and I did my research. And thank God, the first therapist that I did reach out to was an awesome fit. I don't think that's usual. That's probably like not a normal experience for a lot of people. But I think it is also because I did ask for help and I did do a little bit of research. So because that is an overwhelming task for people. Like, they know they need the help. They have no idea where to find it.
Yeah, I was just listening a few days ago to the Howard Stern show. Hopefully nobody's going to turn it off.
No, I love that you listed him as one of that inspiring, I don't remember how you said it on your website.
Totally. And, he's written this new book, and it's basically a love story to therapy. And he said on the Conan O'Brien podcast that he got a telephone number from a friend, same process. That is the best process, by the way, hands down. You will save yourself so much of a headache by just contacting 1 or 2 people that you really love and respect and will have discretion, and just ask if they know of anybody, right? It at least helps you narrow it down. But he said he got a name and he had it for 5 years.
Oh, wow.
Sitting on his desk. And so that's an example. And by the way, I don't think that's unusual.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people keep putting it off and keep putting it off. So the first thing I would say is definitely, if you're comfortable, ask friends. Second, I would say nowadays, I was looking for a therapist when there were no websites. Nowadays, everybody's got a website. And if you go to my website, you probably had a pretty good sense of who you were going to be talking to today, just from going to my website, right? They're pretty good representations of how people orbit in the world.
Yes.
And so just Google things you're interested in. If you think you're interested in, you want to do, therapy with somebody who has a mind, body, brain connection or does integrated wellness, Google and start there. And then what I always tell my patients is this. They call me up, they make an appointment, which, by the way, that's heroic in and of themselves.
Yes,
you're calling a stranger who's going to now ask you personal questions on the phone, right? So I always tell people on the phone call, if I'm taking new patients, well, first of all, if I'm not taking new patients, I call every patient back. And as I increasingly sort of get more people contacting me, I'm taking less people. And I have to have this conversation with lots of people. But I feel like if you called me and I have breath in my lungs, I'm returning your call, even if it's a week later, because I don't ever want somebody to have just get crickets back after making that heroic
Yes.
effort. So I call everybody back. I always suggest 2 or 3 names of people that I think here in Honolulu do really outstanding work. So I always try to give them a personal referral. But what I tell anybody, even if they've made the appointment with me, I say, listen, this is super non-committal. We're going to make an appointment. You're going to fill out the paperwork that's on my website. You're going to bring it in with you. And we're going to sit down and we're going to have a 45 to 55 minute talk. And I've got it. Like, all you have to do is show up. And from there, I'll take it from there. This is my part of the job.
Yeah.
And you are interviewing me more than I am interviewing you. And I say to every person, I want you to feel by the end of the first appointment and at the very far edge, the end of the second appointment, you should have a pretty strong inclination of whether or not you think you can work with me.
Yeah.
If you can, great. If you can't, no big deal.
Right.
I will make you a personal referral. There is no ego involved. The goal is for you to find somebody that you think you can take this journey with. And it's an intimate journey. Definitely. So, and that usually helps people feel pretty comfortable because you've already assured them that coming to see me doesn't mean we're now locked into a relationship.
Right.
So
Yes.
That squelches the anxiety of like, oh my God, it's going to be like Groundhog Day. Like, how am I going to get out of this if I don't like it? And I've let you know that you're in control. Yeah. If it's a good fit and you feel like there's good chemistry, that's great. And if not, I'm not going to be upset with you. I'm not angry. I'll make you a referral. And the other thing it does is it mirrors right from the start that you are going to be the focus, not me. You're not coming to me for answers. You're coming to me so that you can have a relationship with somebody who will help you expose and reveal the answers that are inside of you.
Yeah, you're helping them guide them back to themselves. Really.
Yeah, exactly. Totally. I am an expert in, the things I'm trained in, right? But I'm not an expert in you.
Yes, I have so much respect for that. Yeah.
So like you have to determine this. And it's also ways that you model having difficult conversations. You model confronting things that it is hard to say to somebody like, thank you so much, but this doesn't feel totally great. And I just want to check out some others and I'll come back. By the way, we do that with jeans and
I know
shoes.
Yes. And to me, it's such a practice of self-respect to be able to say those words or to hold those, to toe those boundaries and to really honor what's right for you. And I teach this all the time in the health arena. My whole premise is helping women to be self-directed and self-led. So they stop chasing all these diets and fitness programs, right? And really understanding and learning how to honor the needs of their physiology based on who they are as people and what their likes and dislikes are and where their
slice of time.
Yes.
Yeah. And it can change. In the long arc of a relationship with clients, somebody's going to love this form of movement at 35. And I can tell you at 45, you're going to need other forms of movement.
Yes. Yeah, self-care is such an evolving, malleable thing. And
it's organic.
It is. And the way our diet and fitness industry teaches it is often so rigid, and women wonder why they're at war with it. And it's because you're trying to stay in this box that you outgrew decades ago.
Right. And that probably wasn't that great, by the way. Let's just take the fat-free one that we were raised in the heyday of that, right? By the way, it wasn't that good for you anyway.
Yes.
I don't care what size jeans you whittled yourself into.
Right.
It's
so true. So this has been brilliant conversation. I so appreciate this. I would love to give you the opportunity. Is there anything else you want to say? Anything you want to leave listeners with today?
Well, first of all, I've loved this. I'm so glad that we connected. And nothing in particular other than that I would want anybody listening that's struggling with that first step to know that no matter where you live and you're listening, you now know that you have at least 2 people, you and me, that you can email and we can point you in the direction of something that will get the wheels rolling. The entry point to adult growth and change is you can enter on any of those 5 domains. You can start with looking at your sleep and then move to hydration, nutrition, movement, and recovery. And I consider therapy and recovery, any self-care practice is. You can enter in at therapy. You can enter in at movement. Movement's massively transformative. Yeah. So that essentially you can start anywhere. Yeah. But the starting is the big step.
Yeah. And no matter how small that step is, right? Just making a phone call, sending an email, calling a friend to seek out who some good referrals might be for therapy. I was going to ask you, do you work with people remotely?
I'm starting to now because I'm moving more and more. One of the things I think that the coaching industry has really challenged psychology on, and I've appreciated that challenge as a clinician, is this notion of that you have to be in brick and mortar. And there are spaces in which that brick and mortar, and we're both people that have, shared that we've had long, productive therapeutic relationships with people. So I do it every day, right, as a therapist. So I do think I'll always have a brick and mortar practice, but I am increasingly working in the sort of consulting and coaching realm and trying to really kind of develop my own style that's not face-to-face in the traditional way. And that's just for you guys who have been pioneering it, it's a well-oiled muscle for you, right? And for me, it's new. And so it's been really exciting and really challenging to figure out all of that. But I'm getting there. So
it's a good opportunity to practice your emotional flexibility.
Yeah, to be uncomfortable. This chapter of my life is for sure that way, right?
Awesome.
And really get to kind of bump up against that. So I am starting to work with people remotely, and I've gotten different certifications that allow me to do that and really not use my psych license. Because, psychologists, you have to be licensed in the state that the patient is in. Mm-hmm. And so it is a limitation. I think ultimately our field will respond to the growing success of the coaching industry by, I think, within the next couple of years, perhaps removing that limitation in certain cases. So we'll see. But I do. I work remotely now and I have brick and mortar.
Fantastic. And I will link your website and all your social media channels to the page on my own website where this podcast will be found. I know you brought so much value to this conversation today. I can't thank you enough for your time and energy. And I definitely see that we will be doing a future interview together. So if you're game for it.
It's been great. And I'm so appreciative of having me on. It's been fabulous.
Excellent.
So Jackie strikes again.
Jackie strikes again. Exactly. Well, you have a wonderful evening. And again, thank you so much. Thank you for listening to the Grace and Grit podcast. It is time to mend the fabric of the female health story. And it starts with you taking radical responsibility for your own self-care. You are worth the effort. And with a little grace and grit, anything is possible.